You close the deal, but the sales isn't over. Tobi Davis showed me that CX is really just sales. You're not selling money, you're selling time. In this episode, the exact template that doubled his AI resolution rate, a $20 workflow that replaced $2K a month software, and how to turn customers into unpaid salespeople. Tobi, you lead CX at Pupil Progress and you mentor founders to
Hi
mentor
there.
CX.
Yes.
Can you give people the quick version of both?
Yeah, absolutely. So I lead CX at Pupil Progress. So I joined when we were super small. Taking over a lot of the sort of customer support, customer relationships, and then growing that into a really sort of powerful, proactive function. Using new technologies, using lots of different things to just make sure that our users have the best experience possible using Pupil Progress, which is a SaaS product used in schools by teachers and leadership staff. And I also work in an organization called Mentors CX. So I've learned quite a few things, sort of the hard way in a lot of senses, to do with customer support and customer experience. And so I work with founders to help them sort of grow their CX operations within their businesses, and also other sort of CX leaders and aspiring CX leaders as well.
In one of our conversations, you once told me that CX is basically sales, except instead of getting people to invest money, you're getting them to invest time. When you were mentoring founders, how do you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really it's something that kind of just clicked with me one time, and it's really stuck since then. And it was actually sort of when we were designing a lot of our training materials for Pupil Progress, looking to move to a more kind of asynchronous model rather than physically sort of having calls or going into the schools to train our users. I'm fortunate to have a friend who works as an instructional designer. So he designs training for a living. And he kind of said the same thing about when he designs training, that, of course, it's natural to think, if you're going to build a training course, you just want to tell people how to do the core functions and how to complete the different things that you need them to complete. But really, you need to sort of come at it from the angle of, you need to convince them that it's worth their time. It's no good sort of telling them how to do something on your platform if they don't know what the point of them doing that is, or why they should spend the time doing that. And so I think that has kind of that sentiment has really shaped how we try to build a customer experience at Pupil Progress, in terms of, I appreciate sort of every business, particularly every B2B business is different, but we're in a situation where I have the school will purchase Pupil Progress, and that will be from the principal, the vice principal, whoever it is sort of near the top of the chain, really. But then we have a product that's used across the school, across every single teacher, every single department. And so the challenge that we have sometimes is, we have users who have been told, you need to use this piece of software, but it's not something that they've gone and found off their own back, or it's not something that they're sort of particularly excited about, right? Because it's adding to their workload. And if you, and again, sort of what we've learned is, if you don't get your customer experience right, then you have a situation where that contract comes up for renewal in a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. It hasn't been adopted. There's people who don't like it, who don't want to use it. And every year the school's sort of setting their budget. And if it's something that isn't being used by everybody, isn't 100% essential, then, that obviously makes it a more difficult job for us, I suppose, in terms of renewing that contract.
Right.
So where I say sort of customer experience is really similar to sales in a lot of ways, is, yes, someone purchases your product and it's all well and good kind of in theory, but then when they actually start using it, they really need to understand and see how it's worth their time and worth them actually sort of investing in. So I think a lot of conversations that I've had from a more sort of support, CX, customer success perspective are really similar in nature to sales calls, right? Because you're trying to get the investment, but rather than just the sort of the commercial side, it's investment. And when you think about it, they're very, very similar.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. When I was working at Product Fruits, which is a user onboarding platform, it had to jump on hundreds of calls with customer success teams and product teams and help them optimize their user onboarding workflows. And this is exactly what you were saying. You need to identify how you tailor the segment customer experience for your ICPs. And most of the times, of course, the teams are in rush. They're like, okay, I want something generic. And then, like you say, some time passes and then they come back to you. All right, my clients don't like it. They hate it. So,
Yeah.
which smells like a churn. So we got to do something here. And then you're back to where you started, segmenting,
Mm.
understanding like all the customer observations in terms of the journey, experience, and whatnot. But yeah, thanks a lot for that, for shedding a light on that perspective. And
Yeah.
about the common customer success mistakes when founders come to you for
Mhm.
mentorship. What's the common CX mistake you see them making?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, or a really good question, should I say? And I think it's a tough one to manage, right? Because a lot of the time you're working with a similar kind of model in terms of a piece of software or a product that is purchased by one person or a small number of people and used by a lot more people within the organization. Say, for example, my team, we use Intercom, we use HubSpot, and although I will have conversations with the customer success manager from there or whatnot, 95% of the company has no interaction ever with anybody from HubSpot or from Intercom. And so that means two things. And I think one is that how can you actually put the time into building those relationships, right? Because you're already short on time, particularly if you're a founder, if you're running a business, you've got a lot of things to do, and your product is being used, say, by 50 people in an organization. You don't have time to bring all of them on board and have a call with all of them and do all of the work there. And similarly, from the other side, you're putting quite a lot of faith or trust, for lack of a better term, in whoever is leading the rollout of that product, that they're going to be able to echo your message and communicate your message. Say, for example, if it's you and me on this call, and you could say to me, Daniiar, that tell me about your product, and I'm super bought in, and I think it's great, and I'm excited to buy it. I then need to go and say the same things that you said to all of my staff, and if I can't do that, or if I can't do that as well as you can, then we've got a bit of a problem. And so I think this is where sort of the really inclusive, really kind of cross user or bottom up approach with customer success and customer experience can be really, really helpful. And it's things like I say, sort of, yes, the reality is you're not going to have time to speak to every single one of your users, or if you do, then maybe there's other problems going on. But, creating a really kind of joined up user experience on the platform, making sure that you have the resources, that you're communicating those resources at the right times with every single user. There's so many great technologies out there now that can automate communications. You can be super, super segmented with your communications. And these are the things that can almost sort of help you, quote unquote, have that sales conversation with every single user, even without you sort of speaking to each of them directly. And I think that's where if you really have a joined up positive customer experience, that's the real value in it, I think.
Right. Which kind of brings me back to my memories when I used to cold call. I think one of the
Hmm.
small organizations and where I work, and there was this like huge poster, this ABC, always be closing, like
Hmm.
or always be calling, right? So just pick up the
Yeah.
damn phone, call the customer, sort the thing out ASAP.
Yeah.
And
And oh, sorry. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is it, like it's great. And sometimes you need to do that. We say, for example, something that I've been doing a lot in my role is actually visiting a lot of the schools that we work with in person. So I'm going in, I am having conversations with all of the teachers and all of the kind of school leaders and exam managers and data managers and stuff like that. And it's, great because, I mean, one, I've learned a lot about our customer perspective, customer sentiment, definitely. But, it is really powerful to be able to have those sort of targeted sort of sales type conversations where, you can go really specific to somebody's context, their use case, and really speak to them. And it's great if you've got time to do that, or if you've got a team that can do that, that is ideal. But certainly the situation that we've been in with Pupil Progress, and that I imagine the situation that a lot of your members or some of the people watching this will be in, is that you don't have the resources to be able to do those things. There's a lot that you can do, a lot that you can automate, a lot that you can be proactive with, that can have a really sort of positive impact.
Speaking about automating those very mundane work, a lot of our
Hmm.
small SaaS and bootstrap founders, I think, are not there yet because you can imagine they wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have sales or marketing background, right? And yes, they build amazing product, they ship it out there, but then the heavy lifting goes in place, such as doing sales and marketing. And oftentimes they don't have the luxury to go and meet with their clients in
Hmm.
person. Maybe their average sales ticket is not that high. So you can imagine that you have to go out there and organically start
Yeah.
driving founders. In our community, they have no problem acquiring users, but they can't really keep them.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say like all of them. They've got a leaky bucket. So where do you tell them to start through the lens of customer experience?
Yeah, I think the best possible place to start is, and it almost feels obvious to say, right? And I'm sure it's something that everybody already has, but I think it's something that there's huge amounts of value in, which is a proper sort of fully equipped knowledge base. So articles about every single thing to do with the product, with your platform, the questions that you get. If you notice a question come up once that you haven't had before or that you need to answer, then sort of always looking at that stuff from a perspective of, okay, what gap is there that means this person hasn't been able to do this the first time? Because something that we've certainly found, and we found with a number of our customers that have churned, is it's quite a small percentage of your users who actually ever will reach out to support, right? It's your sort of typically more engaged users, your ones who have already kind of bought in and want to make it work, so want to reach out to you because they genuinely want a resolution to their problem. I think where you could potentially fall into the trap with this is assuming that all of your users are like that, right? Like the reality is there are going to be a chunk of your user base who don't really want to use your product, and their manager, their boss, whoever it is, has told them to use it. And they're thinking, oh, well, I'm busy enough in my day. I've got all of these different things to be doing. And now they're telling me I need to use this new software or learn how to do this new thing. And that sentiment is what can create churn, right? Because it goes on for time, and then, it gets to the point where whoever is the deal decision maker, whoever's sort of leading on the rollout, is thinking, oh, well, it's just a pain for me. It's a pain, like, trying to get everybody to use this when they don't want to use it. And I think that's a really big part of where churn can come from. So
Right.
I think starting with your resources, making sure that everything is covered, and regardless of how many people are asking a question, always assume that if something's coming through to support, it is wider than it seems from your side. And then, as I say, sort of, I mentioned it a little bit earlier on, but in terms of when you're creating training and when you're creating sort of onboarding resources and onboarding and implementation documentation, really making sure that that's coming from a perspective of why, not just sort of how, not just how to use your product, but why should you be using X, Y, or Z product, and making sure that you do all of that, you have that conversation before you even start talking about the how. With Pupil Progress, we're in a bit of, just as an example, we're in a bit of an interesting space. So we're a tracking and monitoring platform, which there's not really any others out there. So if a school isn't using Pupil Progress, they're using something like Excel or Google Sheets. But obviously, those are softwares that aren't specifically designed for that purpose, and they're not joined up across the school. And I won't do the whole pitch, don't worry. But in all of our training and all of our resources, first and foremost, we focus on, okay, what actually is this product? What is the problem that it solves? How is it different to what you're doing already or what you've been doing up to this point? And why should you care? Basically, why has your boss bought this? Why are they telling you to use it? And then once you sort of set all of that stuff, then you can start talking about, okay, and this is how you add your class. This is how you add your exam in our context, of course. But I think sometimes, going straight into that stuff without doing the legwork beforehand in terms of really setting the scene on why you should do this is so powerful for adoption and just makes your product or service just much stickier.
In sales, we multi-thread. So there is an economic buyer you're talking to, but it doesn't mean that economic buyer is the one who is going to be utilizing and making the most of the software. So we tend to multi-thread. So go out there and talk to other stakeholders. What's your take on this use case? Why does this software is going to impact on the ABC use case, right? The problem that you guys are experiencing. And this is where you gather every bit of that insight and information from every stakeholder and then create an image. If there's a missing piece, this is where it kind of like knocks some points, right? Speaking to the context of HubSpot, right? So you set up points and then it was on a scale 0 to 10. So you have 8. And then you pass that to customer success. You kind of inform them, hey, there is a stakeholder, they bought it, but there is a stakeholder who doesn't seem to be on the same page. So you guys have to work this out, right? And here is some directions and maybe some transcripts from calls and whatnot that you pass to customer success for them to not to have the conversation at the end of the year or the time where they need to renew. They're like, okay, everything was super good. I see that your health score was perfect, but why are you canceling your contract with us, right? So just to avoid the conversation. And you work, Tobi, with reluctant users at Pupil Progress. I think there are those kind of users, teachers who are told to use the software but don't want to. How does that apply to a founder whose users signed up but aren't actually engaging?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? And I think I like what you mentioned almost about the kind of the health scores, because it's a situation that I'm sure, and anybody in any kind of customer success function, whether that's big, small, super startup company is familiar with, where you have your metrics and then you just get an email one day that says we're not renewing, and they're 5 out of 5 on everything, and they all look kind of good and whatnot, and it still happens to us sometimes, and I think there's an extent to which you can never have too much confidence in what the numbers are telling you, because of things like these. I think again, sort of, it really comes down to the classic kind of sales conversations and sales personalization, and really kind of broadening that out to across all of the people who are going to be using your product. Again, so HubSpot is a good example, right? Just because they do so many things and there's so many different moving parts to it, whereby if I'm a customer success manager at HubSpot, I need to have a very different conversation with the head of support as I have with the head of marketing, because they're both using this piece of software, but they're using it in different ways. And as I say, at Pupil Progress, that's a super key one for us, because we'll have maths teachers and we'll have PE teachers, and they're both using it, but obviously those are two completely different subjects, two completely different ways of using the platform. And So I think there's a really big point to make here about kind of contextual relevance to the person that you're speaking to, particularly if you do have a relatively complex product, or you have a product that's used by lots of different sort of types of people, or people in different roles, where I was speaking earlier. And it all comes back to the resources that you have, and the resources that you can create. And then I think delivering those on a really specific, on a really personalized basis that shows authenticity and shows that you understand their job, because some people might not think that you do, or some people might think, oh, well, this isn't better than what I was using before, or you don't understand the problems that I'm having, and so it makes me not want to use it. And so, being sort of really specific, really personalized with your communications is key. And again, I think maybe it sounds obvious to say, but the sales process is forever. Yes, you get them in, they sign the contract, they sign for however long it is that they sign for, and that's great. That's step one that's done. But for your business to grow and to keep getting that money in, you're constantly selling, even if you're not selling something, right? Like, I'm speaking something differently to an upsell or growth of a contract. It's like you're constantly selling because you need their time more than anything else. You need them to spend their time on your product, to engage with it, to adopt, to, for whatever it is that you're making and selling, to become a really key part of their daily or their weekly workflow, or however often you want them to use it. And so that's the challenge. And so, as I say, in an ideal world, that we sort of, as you were speaking about earlier, you'd have a big team, or you'd have people just sort of ready to hit the phones and speak to as many of your customers as possible and solve as many of those problems as they can. But, it's not really going to be a reality for most businesses. And this is sort of where I go back to saying, being proactive, having your, onboarding, training resources sort of really stacked, having your knowledge base, everything like that kind of really powerful and full of useful information is what's going to help you kind of bridge that gap, if that makes sense.
Right. A quick question about the knowledge base. You took, Tobi, your AI resolution rate from 40 to 80% in 6 months. When founders ask you how do you do this, right? Essentially,
Yeah.
what do you tell them?
So I can pop my screen up actually, if you'd like, and show some
Awesome. Please do.
Show some bits and pieces on here. So we use Intercom. So we use Fin. And you can see this is sort of from last year. This is 2025. And so, we sort of started at around 40-50%. This was kind of, and at the time, like now, obviously we'll get to this part in a second, but at the time, this still felt like super powerful, right? Because it was just taking so much work from us. This is on a deflection rate, which is like an involvement rate of 70%. I think it was a bit lower then. So it was like involved in 50% and then solving about 50%. So that's like a quarter of our support conversations that we could just switch this thing on, and it was helping with, which was great. But the situation that we were in, and where I think the knowledge base is so important, is we had a knowledge base that was predominantly written by myself, and I'm not going to say I 100% knew what I was doing. I just kind of, would have a question come through. Like I said earlier on, have a question come through, be like, oh, we don't have an article about this. Quickly write one, and then it's on there. And so I was writing the way that I think it would make most sense for a human to read it, right? Which is paragraphs, you're reading it from top to bottom, and you know more, you get your answer at the end. And the issue was when we switched Fin on, or I'm sure, any kind of support AI agent is very similar in this, is it made it very difficult for Fin to actually go in and pick the information that it needed, because it couldn't really find it in amongst all of my formatting and, the way that I'd written it. Some of our articles were just a video and no text, because it was just like, watch the video and then And so we did a whole revamp. We switched it on, we sort of did okay. And then we thought there's actually a lot of improvement that we could make, because Fin just isn't able to find the information that it needs, or it's getting confused and saying the wrong things. It's not taking into consideration some of the stuff we were speaking about earlier on in terms of the, personalization differences and user permissions and what they were using the platform for and all of that stuff. So we spent a lot of time redoing all of our articles, basically. We put together a template, which looks a bit funny because I've just downloaded it as a PDF here, but basically establishing every single article that we were going to write was going to follow the exact same structure. I was going to follow a structure that makes it really easy for both our human audience and our AI to go and read it. And I think that's the key part here is, we're now in a time where you're creating your resources for two different audiences at the same time and making sure that both of those are able to take that information on board. And so, what we end up with now is something like this. So short sentences, nothing sort of too long or too bulky. Obviously, we've got the GIFs. We've always had GIFs, but, a really clear sort of explanation of what's happening in the GIF, really sort of clear step by step, broken up into different parts of that feature and different things that you use it for, and just sort of, having the information really accessible here in short bits, so that if someone's saying, I want to view FlexiGrade data across Pupil Progress reports, Finn now knows it's going to come here, and it's, it's going to send them this. And before, all of this same information was still in here, right? So if you or me, or if any actual person was reading this, you'd be able to figure out the answer. But now people are interacting with your resources in a different way. We have far more people interacting with Finn, our AI agent, than we do actually reading the articles. So most people are getting this information as a kind of repackaged way. They're not coming here to read it. But once we did that, it really kind of, you can see around the time that we did, because I think we launched Finn towards the end of last year. We came into a really busy period and we're glad for the impact it was having sort of through that busy period. And then for us, sort of into between January and April is sort of a quieter time for us. There's no exams and it's sort of a little bit calmer. And so we spent a lot of time actually going through redoing all of our articles in line with, this template, making sure that they followed it, making sure that if there were videos, there were very clear instructions as to what's going on in the video. And that's where you see this sort of really huge growth, and now we're a sort of consistent about 80%, maybe just under 80% in our resolution rate. And so it's doubled in the space of, from February to July. It's sort of almost doubled the resolution rate. And it's so powerful because, again, it comes back to sort of a couple of different things that we were speaking about, whereby the thing that this is really good for is taking away a lot of the really kind of straightforward stuff. How do I reset my password? How do I sort of do X, Y, or Z? And so what it does is it gives us more time to do a lot of the things that we were speaking about earlier on in terms of, we have a really talented, really sort of smart support team who know everything there is to know about our product. But before this, they were almost wasting their time answering these questions that are super simple, right? When they can be so much more valuable than that. And so, the support queries that were coming through now are just much more complex than they were before, because obviously, we're only getting the kind of the top level of complexity stuff. And we're also able to kind of repurpose our support team a little bit to actually become even more valuable than they've ever been. And that is in terms of having these one-to-one conversations with our customers, the things we were speaking about earlier on, almost as an extension of a sales operation, because we're able to put so much more time into that stuff. And so it's a question that I sort of get asked quite a lot about, working in support, working in CX, and how is AI going to impact that. And I think AI is obviously replacing some of the things that your support team does, but when your support team has more time, what you have is a number of incredible product experts who know everything about what your product does and everything about how people use it and the problems they have and the workflows that they go through. And when you think about it, that knowledge is so powerful for a lot of the things that we've been speaking about today, because if you can free up more of those people's time to really go into detail and sell, essentially, even though they're not selling an actual product, sort of selling to be able to get that time investment, it can be really, really powerful.
Right. There's one thing I got really curious about.
Mhm.
So, how did you come to figure out that articles need to be written for AI, not just humans? What's that point of like realization look like? Can you take me back to?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one, right? Because there's a lot of work that goes into rolling out a technology like this. And I think for us, sort of where we came to realize that was, we spent a lot of time going through all of the wrong answers and all of the things that were being redirected to the team. And even just kind of asking the team anecdotally, what are the things that are being pulled through to you that the AI has not been able to answer. And the more that we were kind of looking at the things that were coming through, we were a bit like, well, we do have an article about that. That is on our help center. So why isn't it pulling it through? As I say, we're in a situation now where 25% of the stuff that's coming through is so specific to that user and their workspace and their account that, it needs one of our human team to get involved with. But a lot of it wasn't. And it was kind of like, okay, well, it's answering some of these questions fine, but then some, it just isn't. And that was when we, really kind of took a look at our help center, and we did a lot of research and reading up as a team in terms of how to package information for an AI agent. How do we actually structure that, put that together, and what from our articles that we've got at the moment is working and what isn't. Say a good example of this is beforehand we had a lot of help articles whereby the title of the article might be a question. It might be, how do I add an assessment? And so if somebody literally goes onto your chat and asks, how do I add an assessment? Great, problem solved. It would give them the right answer. But there's, 50 different ways you could ask that question with different language. And our AI wasn't picking up most of them. It was only picking up some that were sort of really close. And so that's where this new template for articles came in, where sort of the understanding that was actually our problem, our blocker, was that, yes, we have the information, but it's not able to get to the information that it needs because of the way that we've written things or the way that our help center is structured at the moment. And so yeah, that was the main thing that we noticed there, was that we had the information, we had the articles, but it was still getting answers wrong. And then it was like trying to sort of put two and two together.
Brilliant. Awesome. I love it. And how long did it take for you guys to like get from the period of you where you guys were coasting at 40% or maybe
Mhm.
lower? You came to realization, okay, this is the guideline that we have to follow in order to up the numbers, and then to a solution.
Yeah, it's a good question. As I say, it's something that I think, because we switched Fin on, it would have been sort of around September, October time the previous year, and it was sort of working okay. And then we hit a real busy period, right, which I'm sure is similar for a lot of support teams in that kind of end of the year time. And so that's where I say we didn't sort of put too much time into it, too much thought into it. We thought, this is having a decent impact, and we have, we just need to sort of put the fires out at the moment. So we'll come back to it. And then so it was into sort of January, February. We started with, as I say, trying to figure out what the problem was. Is it that we don't have the right content? Is it that people are asking questions that they weren't before, and so we don't have that? Is it that, we haven't updated our content recently enough? Have there been feature changes, buttons moving, et cetera, that means that's creating the problem? Which there was some of, that stuff needs doing as well. And as I say, I mean, we were in a situation where we had, I can't remember exactly, 150, 200 odd articles on our help center, really, really sort of extensive help center. And it does take a bit of time. Even it might only take 20, 30 minutes to rewrite one of your articles, or less if it's a shorter one. But, often you there's recording new GIFs, there's transcribing videos, and these things that do take time. And so it's hard to put an exact number on it. But as I say, I mean, you can imagine it was a fairly sort of lengthy process in terms of rewriting all of those. Of course, as well, you start with your more popular ones. Like there's some big number of our articles on our help center are like uber specific and not that many people actually need to know. So you start with your basic ones. That's when you see the big bulk of improvements, and then sort of just tidying that up sort of towards the end. And so it really is a question of how your content is at the moment, is how your AI agent is going to perform. And if your content is really great and concise and clear, then there's not going to be that much work to do, I would imagine. For us, it wasn't. I imagine probably for a lot of businesses, it's similar. Yeah.
Yeah, but I can imagine for a small SaaS founder or for a bootstrap founder, this time is valuable. It's like such valuable because every day it costs you a lot of money. And you showed what you shared your screen and showed us a guideline template that your team used in order to get these articles written for AI, not just humans. Is there a chance you can share that with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I can, absolutely share that. I mean, as I say, that was written specifically for Intercom Fin, which, maybe it works for the other ones as well. I would assume it does, but quick sort of disclaimer there. But yeah, there's an extent to which we kind of had the luxury, right, to go in and actually have, myself doing this, our content lead doing this, and have the people to do that work. And that's what's got us up from 40% to 80%. Now, with the template and with a bit of, a few minutes creating a custom GPT or whatever it is that you would want to do, I think you'd be able to get most of the way there. Maybe you do need sort of some of that specific product knowledge to get all the way up to 80%, but I think it's pretty feasible that you can have some big jumps in your resolution numbers just by even getting an AI to write for another AI. And so, yeah, absolutely. I'll send that to you once we're done.
All right. Thank you very much. Sharing is caring, right? Like they say.
Yeah.
And if a founder is setting up their first AI support agent this week, let's say with zero budget, what's the minimum viable knowledge base?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, a lot of depends on what you're using. I mean, if you're using something like HubSpot, then great, it's already there. But really, you could just chuck it all into like a Google Doc or Notion or Monday or whichever sort of work management software you use. At the end of the day, you just need to have a way of your AI agent sort of knowing roughly what the question is and then knowing roughly what the answer is. And so I think there is going to be an element of time investment, right? Which is unavoidable. You're still going to need to do the work in terms of you're the one that knows how your product works. And so, you need to sort of give it a starting point. But I think if you can, have something like a template like we have, or any adjustments that you need to make to it, and then, even just a long Google Doc that says question, answer, et cetera, it could be a really great sort of starting point to then get your base level content together, and then, start to see some really great results from your AI agent. And another thing as well, which I think is, again, it's quite easy to do on Intercom. I imagine it's similar with other platforms, is your answers that you've already given. There's no reason why you couldn't be using those as custom answers for your AI agent as well. If someone has said, how do I update my billing details? And you've replied to that in an email, then save that email. Job's already done. Put it where you need to put it, if that's in an article or in a private document or whatever it is. A lot of your content probably will already exist just from your email inbox or a chat service or whatever it is that you're using. And so, yeah, as I say, if you're looking to sort of go from nothing to something, I would say those are the two main things that would be a great place to start.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. The tech stack is such a crucial, I think, topic to like really consider before when you are on this like entrepreneurship on a solo journey, especially. You once mentioned that you got quoted, I think, a couple thousand a month, right? If I'm not mistaken, for CX analysis
Yeah.
tools. And you build your own instead. For founders who can't afford fancy software, what did you actually build?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share that in a second. And I think, yeah, the situation that I was in as head of CX, as I'm sure you can imagine, is I'm getting asked questions in terms of what are our customers saying? What features are they enjoying? What features don't exist that they want to exist? Like, what are the things that's frustrating them, et cetera, et cetera. And so I sort of started having a look to the market and different softwares that can provide that kind of service, but everything was real enterprise level. And, at Pupil Progress, we're definitely not a startup anymore. We're 35 people, sort of definitely more in a like scale up or slightly even more mature situation. But we were getting quoted like 30 grand a year, 40 grand a year for these softwares. And it's like, that's never going to happen at the moment that we are. Like, I can go and I have my budget, and if I need to go over it, then I can go over it. But it's like, we're in education, we're a small company, like it's not worth that much to us at the moment. And so I kind of thought, well, I still want to do the same thing, but how can I do it when I don't have the budget to spend, right? And so something that I am just like a huge fan of and would recommend to anybody, any founders or anybody who's not already using a service like Make or Zapier, or I think there's one called NAN. I've not used it myself, but I've heard a lot of kind of hype around that. Workflow and automation tools can be so powerful for small businesses, especially because, if you really strip it back, what you're able to do is create an app that is pretty ugly, right? Like, it's not going to look as nice as a SaaS product that you could buy off someone for however much a month, but it's going to do a lot of the same things. And so this is basically what I built, because we have a lot of one-to-one video calls in customer success and customer support, whereby, we speak with our customers about all kinds of things and get this information from them. And my thinking was, we're having hundreds, thousands of calls with customers. And then, yes, that information is being transcribed. Maybe we're making notes, putting that in HubSpot, doing X or Y or Z, but we're not connecting that together. We're not seeing what the trends are across different calls and really joining things up. And so I set this up. So it basically just watches transcripts from Google Drive, so it can find them in there. There's a separate automation that saves every CSM, every support agent, all of their transcripts to the same folder that come into here. It gets the content, puts it into a really sort of straightforward OpenAI API, right? With a straightforward system prompt, URL collaborative research assistant, and sort of extracting key information and then outputting that as JSON so that we can put it into Google Sheets. And then what we end up with is something like this. Obviously, I've just sort of blanked out the names, but we have what I have here is essentially all of the same information that I wanted from these other softwares, in a way that doesn't particularly look very pretty or look, great. It's all just in a Google Sheet, but we do have the same thing here. So what I can then go and do is I can look into these specifically. I can search particular keywords, or I can just sort of see. It's easier for me to see, say, we've had 20 conversations in a week. We've had 20 calls in a week. It's much easier for me to look at this and see what's going on than going in and reading every one of the transcripts. But even more so, we've got all of this information in a spreadsheet now that I can download this. I can either build, another workflow if I wanted to, or I could put it into ChatGPT, or I could do whatever else sort of needs doing with it. And so essentially it's just a much easier way of getting to the end result of what I needed, which was, I want to know more about, we've got 5 support agents, 3 CSMs. I want to know more about what's coming up on those calls, what's our product not doing, what do we need to be building, how can we kind of address all of these things. And yeah, I don't really have much budget to do it. So, we already use Make. I think Make's like 20 euros a month. It's not super expensive. And then, in OpenAI credits, it's a pittance, like a few pounds to do a whole month's worth of analysis. So, what we've able to, or what we sort of did was, rather than something was £2,000 a month and got us 100% of what we wanted, we found something that's like £20 a month and has got us, at least 60 or 70% of the way there.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the workflow. This is very, it looks very simple, but gets the job done. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think the learning curve for tools like Make, Zapier, or N8N is like lower and lower these days
Mm.
because they are like baking a lot of AI into it. And these days you can just type in whatever you want and it just builds the whole workflow template for you. You just have to set up some, like technicalities in. And yeah, we have like ourselves a lot of workflows that we use to
Hmm.
automate a lot of these mundane things and huge volumes. But sometimes I get a little hesitant. Have you experienced anything like that where something like broke and it costs you time and money?
Yeah, not too much,
Sure.
but yeah, I mean, I would say in that workflow, we probably process somewhere, depending on how busy of a month it is, somewhere between 2 to 400 calls a month. And, there is an extent to it where you're relying a lot on the the transcription, the Google transcription, and relying on that being accurate. You're relying on, the calls being worthwhile, the amount of times, particularly working with schools, which are all like super old technology, everybody's using Microsoft, the amount of times that we start a call with like Google Meet or Zoom and then have to shut it down after a couple of minutes and move over to Teams because it's not working is pretty common. And so this is where I say for us, it kind of gets us 60 or 70% of the way there. In an ideal world, what we would have would be, I don't know, maybe something like Gong integrating with all of our calls, that then integrating with, one of these kind of real enterprise level VOC analysis and amalgamation tools. And it would work better and it would be more reliable and it would be, ultimately a more ideal workflow, but it's just not a position that we're in to be able to do it. And so,
Right.
you know, yeah, there's going to be some where it doesn't sort of work so well, or that you kind of have to just delete and remove from your data. But if you're looking at it on trade-offs, I think
Yeah, and also I believe these days AI is getting better and better,
mm,
especially Zapier and Make. And I really wanted to ask about the users. Over
yeah,
50% of your deals ask to speak to an existing customer before signing.
yes.
How do you create users who do that for you?
Yeah, it's a really great point, and it's a really interesting one, right? Because it's something that um is happening sort of more and more and more, and I think part of that is to do with the market that we're in, and that schools talk to each other, particularly ones that are sort of geographically close by. They know each other. They, have staff who used to work at one or the other. And sort of where I say we're out of the startup stage almost now. Like we're selling to a different market. Whereby a few years ago, we were this kind of new, exciting, completely different way of tracking your exam data in the school. And so the more forward thinking principles, the more kind of dynamic and tech curious principles were reaching out. And I think now we are in a bit of a stage where we're speaking to more of a wider market and people who maybe are not quite as tech forward or as easily excited about like new things. And so that's sort of where that comes from. And I think it's really really interesting, right? And it actually, we're seeing it quite a lot in software, and it kind of echoes what happens in everyday life. And I think as we've kind of, the internet's not a new thing anymore. There's reviews, there's everything for everything. And my opinion is it's kind of changing the way that people buy things. And we're stripping it back a bit. And an example I'll give is completely separate to SaaS, completely separate to what we're doing. But, I needed a new pair of running shoes, and I could have looked online and researched them, and I could have tried to figure out like which ones I wanted. But I asked my brother, you guys running a lot. And I said, which ones have you got? And he told me that they were quite good. And I went and bought the exact same ones the next day. And there's almost kind of there's a level of trust that comes with that I think people maybe can't find on the internet now. Things like going to a car dealership and things that are in kind of your local community that you can trust. And so that's the situation that we're in. I think that's the way that people are buying things these days. And there's only so much that you can do with your marketing and your resources because, we could have a website that says we're the best product ever and it solves all of these problems. But from the buyer's perspective, so did 10 other tools who say they're all the best product and they solve all the same problems. So it's like, who do you trust? And if I'm a principal, I'm going to trust another principal from a school half an hour down the road than I am, me, who works for the company or a website. And so it's something that we've really been developing. And I think where customer experience is so important, because if you get all of those things right that we were speaking about, earlier in terms of early stage engagement, selling to everybody in the school, just creating a really positive environment around your product and excitement around your product and an audience who actually wants to use it rather than has to use it, you're gonna reach the kind of actualization. You're gonna reach the point that you want every customer to reach, which is they're seeing all of the positive outcomes that we know can come from our product because it's a great product, and that customer is not a concern anymore. They're super sticky. They're just going to keep paying the bill every year because they really realize the potential of the product. An example I'll give is Intercom. Like, we use Intercom at Pupil Progress, and it does everything that I need it to do. Makes my life easy, makes my team life easy, and so they never need to have a conversation with me. I'm like, I'm happy. It's good. It's fine. And, being in kind of CX communities and CS communities, I'll happily tell other people that, I've just mentioned it now, but it's like, I'll have calls with people who are considering different products and they'll be like, oh, has anybody used Intercom? Does anyone want to talk about it? And it's like, I'll talk about it. Okay? I'm not on the payroll. I'm not on any kind of commission. I'm not on anything, but there's a product there that has made my life as a customer experience leader much easier. So you almost kind of want to pay it forward, right? Because there's someone who's in a situation that I'm in and I want to help them. And then maybe I'll be in that situation and they can help me. And so that's the same thing that we see with our users. These schools aren't competing with each other in the way that I'm not competing with another customer experience leader from a different company. And so I just, I have knowledge. I want to support them where I can, and then our users are the same. And so we've kind of identified them. We've created a really great community of these users, and they're happy to do the work for us, essentially, because we've made their life easier, and we've actually, they've realized the potential of what we sold them. It's not like we've sold something and whatnot. It's like we've sold something and they've seen the results, and so they're grateful for that, and they're happy to support us. And I think, that's something that, because you hear people speak about how everything has like a 4.7 stars review or whatever it is. And, in the kind of, there's so much information about everything that I think over the next few years, this is going to become a much more prominent thing that people are speaking about in terms of trust and who can you trust and what the sort of the buying process looks like with that. And I think, if you're leading a company, particularly in our case, a SaaS company, your users are going to be able to just inherently sell it better than you are, because whoever you're selling to will trust them more than they trust you.
Right.
And so if you can just sort of facilitate that and make that connection happen, I think there's some really exciting results there.
But you said there's everything for everything, right? And these days, there are so many great tools out there. You personally advocate for Intercom, and I loved your brother analogy. Like, you asked your brother, like, where'd you get this thing? He's like, okay, I got this from here. You went and purchased the same product. Obviously, you were not getting paid for advocating for certain tools, right? I'm just curious, when it comes to Intercom, what did they get right that made you do that? Is it the trust? that you kind of like saw so many people use it, or you just like went through it trial and error just to get there yourself?
Yeah, it's a really great question because I think it's probably a bit of both. And you know, it starts from having a product that just works, I think, and it's something that definitely we've got caught up in at Pupil Progress before, is that you have a lot of new features that you want to build and things that you think, oh, if we can build this, then, maybe it will get this contract on, or it can do this, and et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes, the actual most important thing that is going to build trust with your users is it just needs to work. I just need to be able to log on whenever I need to log on and do the things that I need to do without sort of any issues. And, you know, we're in a situation now whereby I personally don't actually use it that much, right? It's mostly my team who are spending their days in Intercom. I never have anybody tell me that it doesn't work, and we use other softwares. We used softwares previously and whatnot. And I'd have people saying, oh, I can't, I'd ask them to do something. They'd be like, I can't do it because this isn't working, or I can't do this thing, or whatever it is. And so I think, once you have your product and you have the core functionality of your product, reliability is so key to building that kind of customer sentiment as well. It goes back again to, as I say, sort of really, why does this product exist? Like, we're not, through the onboarding, through the kind of training that we do, we're not going to talk about how to use it, essentially, because if the software is good enough and it's clear enough and it's easy enough, you don't really need to teach people how to use it. You just need to teach them why, and then they'll go and figure it out. And so with Intercom, it's like, okay, well, it has these AI functionality that works really well. You can be super targeted. You can super targeted in terms of the content that you serve and the proactive messaging that you deliver to your users. You can create a really positive inbox experience for the team. That was a big problem that we had with the service that we used before, is it was actually very difficult to manage all of the conversations in the inbox. Things were either open or closed, and if you closed it, it would have to start again, and it was just kind of creating some headaches. And so they've kind of joined it up at each angle. They've made they've delivered on their promises to me as the leader, in terms of this is the broad functionality that it's able to do, and they've delivered on their promises to the actual end users, which is, our support team, for example, whereby this is a much nicer experience because you're able to be far more in control of your workload. And so they've got it right from both sides. And, they were able to communicate that through the onboarding. As I say, their UI is really straightforward. It's easy to know how to use. And then if you get those things right, it's like perfect. We need a tool that we can proactively message our users on platform, and that our team can respond to customer support requests, and we have one, and it works, and it does everything that we need it to the point where there's no point me thinking about if there's another company or there's another, whatever it is, because it's like it would be a really big shift to change now which software that we use, because there's so much data in there, and it's just so far down on my priority list, right? Like maybe there is something better than Intercom out there. I don't know, and at the moment it's not something that I need to know, because there's more important things going on, and so I think that's the crux of it. It's like, if you solve a problem and your customer is happy, it's fine. My brother in the running shoes, he goes running often. They work on the road, they work off road, they last a long time, they're comfortable, they don't have holes in. And it's like, well, that's everything you want from a pair of running shoes, right? So it's like, okay, if they do those things, then I'm going to buy them. And yeah, so I think it sounds obvious, having a product that works reliably and whatnot. You might think, oh, that's obviously you want to do that, but it really is what creates that trust and that brand loyalty.
Right. You nailed it. And Tobi, in the context of power users as unpaid sales, when you mentor founders on this, how do you normally tell them to identify and nurture their power users? How does that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good one. I think there's an element to this where it very much depends on your business and the audience that you speak to. And as I say, I'll give an example for what I mean by that, which is at Pupil Progress, we work with schools. So there's no remote working. It's you're in or you're out. And so with us and with our schools, if I go into the school and I spend a day with them and I speak to them and I speak to their subject leads and whatnot, that's a perfect way to nurture that relationship, because it's almost speaking in their language, physically there in the same room, sitting side by side in front of the computer, because that's how they work and that's how they work with their staff. Now, that's not going to be the same for probably most businesses, I would imagine, unless you are working, closely with sort of the public sector in that way. But I think in terms of sort of identifying who they are, the best way to do that is through support is a great way. The people who reach out to your support team more often, as we say earlier, are the people who want to make this work and want to use your product and, are super engaged. And so that can be a great place to start. And I think as well, the however it is you go about doing it, the personal connection is really important. So whether that's sort of having a call, as I say, in my case, going and physically visiting them, I think if they know you and they feel comfortable with you, they'll be a lot more comfortable in you asking them to do things, basically. So there'll be different ways that you can spot who's a successful customer, who are your most engaged customers, whatever it might be. And then a great place to start could be reaching out to them directly, inviting them onto a call where you want to hear their feedback, or you're doing product research and you want to listen to the things that they like and the things that they don't like. So you're getting that information, but you're also sort of building the relationship, and you're helping that person to feel ownership over your product as well. They're contributing to its growth, they're contributing to its success. And, as you sort of build those relationships with however many people it is, 5, 10, however you decide you want to do it, whether you work with a lot of different industries and it makes sense to have people in similar industries or whatnot, personal connection, personal relationships is really something to prioritize and will make this whole process a lot easier.
Absolutely. And I think in now, especially in the age of AI, people heavily utilize AI tools. They fight code tools every single day.
Mm.
And I think there is this element that gets lost when you it's not just about how to say shipping the beautiful product or maybe valuable product, but actually is creating a sense of community where you build this meaningful relationship with your customers and create that power users, right? So it comes down to like very simple, a simple rule.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking about connecting and like relationships for a small SaaS founder or a bootstrap founder listening us, right? The whose churn is a mess. What's the first thing they should fix this week?
Good question. The first thing that I would focus on would be generally your voice of the customer, right? Or your understanding of how they feel about your product. There's things that you can learn from analytical tools and whatnot, but like to actually get something from them in terms of sentiment is super valuable. So we at Progress are really big fans of anecdotal evidence, just sort of, as I said before, having a call with some of your customers, just pinging out an email with your meeting link and, trying to get some people to book in with you, and then just listening to what they have to say and listening to how, if they are the deal decision maker, they are leading this across their organization, how their staff think about it and what the feeling is and what is it that people like and don't like. That I think is the best way, because you're able to ask questions, you're able to go deeper into these things that are irritating some of your customers. And as I say, the chances are, if it's affecting this customer or this customer or this customer, or you do it a few times and you start to see themes, it's like, that's what your problem is. That's going to be something that's contributing to your churn. If you're not already doing things like NPS, CES, or, other kind of surveys and ways so that you can collect sentiment information from your users as well. I think that is it's super easy to do, and there's no sort of real downside to it. If you send that out and you get a load of negative feedback back, that's great, in my opinion. That's a good thing. It's super useful, and it's usable, and it gives you an idea for where your customers are, and it stops you from falling into the trap of false confidence. But I think first thing to do, if you're experiencing issues with churn and you're trying to solve it, just speak to as many of your customers as you can, one-to-one. Give them the space to talk and tell you what the problems are, and then see what comes from it, and and go from there.
Pick up the damn phone, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, people will tell you if you ask them. They will gladly tell you. So give them a call and see what they say.
100%. And your workflow that you showed and make speaks for itself. You have a ton of conversation that you carry out with your customers, and what you showed that in the other screen share, where your resolution jumped from 40% all the way to 80%, right? So I guess if you really want to do that, you just have to speak to the customers, build that relationship, connection with them, make a sense of community. And this is where not only the product, not only those where you collect insights from anywhere else, but not internally, right? Already the whatnot. And I think this is the valuable lesson, like a takeaway from this call. And where can people find you, Tobi? Like Mentor CX, Pupil Progress, where should they go?
That's it. Yeah, I mean, if you find me on LinkedIn, would probably be the best place to start. Mentor CX, yes, as well. It is a paid platform, so if you're more than welcome to sort of connect with me on LinkedIn if you have a question or you want to chat about anything. And if you happen to work in a school in the UK or know anybody who does, then Pupil Progress can make their lives easier, I'm sure.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much, Tobi. This
Pleasure.
was great.